Hi, everybody. David Nour. I want to welcome you back to another episode of the Curve Benders Live. Delighted you're here. For our audience, we are live on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube and also Twitter. And joining me is a longtime client, friend, colleague, mentor, someone who I enjoy being around, Dennis Sadlowski. Welcome.
Good morning or good afternoon, David, for those of you on the East Coast.
It is good to have you. Dennis, I really enjoyed our podcast interview this morning, and I would encourage our audience to jump in as we go through this discussion on outside-in leadership with Dennis through your comments. But for those that may not know as much about you, can you start by just giving us a glimpse into your personal and professional journey today?
Sure, David. My story is of, somewhat basic roots. I've got immigrant parents who came over after World War II from Germany, settled in Northern California where I grew up, went to school, studied at Cal Berkeley, decided I needed some challenge. So I studied chemical and nuclear engineering there at Cal Berkeley. And then started my career with GE. It was a fantastic period of 10 years, 6 locations, and later parlayed that forward into a number of different areas. Got an opportunity to work with Siemens, live in Germany, run a $3 to $4 billion business for Siemens. And I say 3 to 4 because we grew it to just under 4 billion. And then later had a chance to run a number of other industrial businesses, from early stage technology and green tech to small cap public company, CECO Environmental, where I just completed my CEO role.
That's a great journey. And you and I talked about what I love about this idea of outside-in leadership is you're not regurgitating a book report. This is something that you deeply believe in and you've implemented in several places. So let's talk about that a second. What is outside-in leadership? How do you describe it? How do you delineate it from other leadership approaches that you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very passionate about this. And for me, outside-in leadership is a lot more than customer orientation, a lot more than just market orientation. It's really about getting the whole senior leadership team and the key decisions that we have to think about and make every day, both with the short term and long term, focused on what's happening outside the company. So those are the macroeconomic changes and maybe even the political landscape that's changing. Those are customers. And I talk sometimes about lead customers who are experimenting at the forefront of your products and services. I really have been a student of competitors. I actually like to know my competitors by name, their tendencies. People do have tendencies, and you can anticipate some of that. And then technology, both inside and especially outside the industry that you compete in. Those are factors of the outside-in leadership, and tying the key decision-making to what's happening out in the world, I think keeps the business moving forward, moving future, adapting to a changing world.
So why don't more leaders embrace this? Because whether they just jump into a new position or transition or some sort of an M&A, there seems to be a greater focus on the internal. Let me kind of get to know the team and figure out what's happening inside. And so where's the pushback against? Because I can't argue with your premise of the customers and the competitors and the market dynamics are critical to the success of that leader.
Well, there's a variety of factors. Quite a few leaders that I know that are quite effective, think about what can I actually get done? What lever can I pull or push that's directly attached to movement of some sort? And for the most part, those are internal levers, and they're important. So it's not as if these aren't important. The problem might be that you may be pushing the wrong direction or answering the wrong questions in terms of that internal. And then there's a whole nother orientation around, call it the expectations, the measurements, whether it's what your board thinks. I found a number of colleagues and friends and leaders that the minute everything they talk about is purely in the financial numbers, they probably lost that zest to really grow and build the business.
So is that at the cost of, is it either or? If I'm really spending time and effort on the internal numbers and I'm trying to get my finger on what's happening and the talent that I have in the organization, is that at the cost of the external factors, the customers, competitors, the market?
Yeah, well, I don't know that being externally focused, meaning outside in, is at the cost of executing, because that's not what I would suggest. It's really about prioritizing from what's happening in the world around you to make the right decisions, not just for today, but for tomorrow and the way we see the shape of the world moving forward, whether that's, again, business model, technology, competition. But I do think in the other way around, an inside out can be limiting. It can be limiting if you're focused on getting that 10% productivity out of your factories, or shifting, a certain skill set around, that you miss some markers of the world, again, starting to shift underneath your feet, and may get caught.
One of the fascinating items that I captured in my notes from our conversation was your request of every senior leader that's ever worked for you to practice this outside-in leadership. Talk about that a second and give us an example.
Yeah, well, certainly. That started early on in my career leading, P&L. And I always knew it important to be out and experiencing what's happening out in the world. And so I made it an MBO. Every function required to get outside, meet with real and paying customers. And yes, a real and paying customer might be a potential customer who's still being serviced by a competitor. But it doesn't mean go to the sales office. It means get out there and experience what's happening on a regular basis. And I got to tell you, the sales guys, the marketing guys, they applaud it. Let's go. Let's do this. I'm out there, and let's drag a few people with us. It's a little more difficult for, the head of IT, the CFO, the head of HR to get comfortable with, does he mean me too? And my answer is always absolutely. And so you need to find a way to build that, usually through a bridge of the sales team. And so, regularly people go out and experience interaction with customer. We bring those back to staff meetings. What did you learn? What did you hear? What are we seeing that's new, different, or reinforcing what we're trying to get done? And I have a host of examples I could talk about.
So why do you believe, let's stay on that for a second. Why do you believe it is so difficult for functional leaders, IT, HR, legal, to get out and go see customers? Part of me says is maybe because not in their DNA or background or in previous roles where they've had. But why do you believe that's so difficult for them? And how did you overcome, or how did you help them overcome those challenges?
Well, usually the two drawbacks, barriers to overcome are outside of comfort zone. I'm not used to doing this, and so I'm not sure how it's going to go. The uncertainty associated with, is always a factor. And then the other is, I have a laundry list. My CFO is a public company CFO. I've got a laundry list of tasks and activities that I'm saddled with that I need to get done. It seems as though we have a sales team, perhaps, that they should be handling this, and they should be interpreting for us, for me per se. And those are two barriers, but they're usually easily overcome after the first visit, maybe the second visit. People are energized by being in that direct contact with customers. I always see it in their eyes, see it in their stories, and to this day, I've never had anybody come back and say that's a waste of time.
So Michael's got a great question, and you said it in our podcast conversation as well. This really does seem obvious. How do leaders either miss it, not get it, or not do it?
The same, it's when you get into that grind and that daily routine of here's my task, here's my deliverables, here's what I think my deliverables are. It's very easy to reprioritize your time in a way that doesn't organize for that outreach, because it does take a little bit of organization for a senior executive, even a CFO, to say, hey, I need to schedule some customer visits. Let me find the right ones. Let me talk to the sales guys. Let's set up the meetings, book the travel, et cetera, and find a way to do that.
So I want to build on that. Eric McCarthy's got a great comment that making this a cultural attribution can make a huge difference. How did you do that? How did you do that at GE? How did you do that at Siemens or other companies you've led, where you made this not a mandate, not a carrot or stick, but part of the culture that we're going to be outside-in leaders?
Yeah, well, a lot of that, like a communications event like you and I are having right now, is through communications and bringing back those stories of what we're learning from customers, what we're seeing in the market, and make that an active part of what people are talking about in the company. Also bringing learning and development programs and tying them to where we see the market going. Bringing customers into, senior leadership meetings to talk about their experience with our company and their expectations. Those kind of things I think help to breed that culturally, that we want to be leaning outside the company. We want to be thinking about the key strategic and operational decisions, from a point of view of what's happening out in the world, not just from the point of view of, let me close the four walls and see how I optimize.
So, and again, I wrote down distinctly in my notes, it wasn't just any go out, it was go see real and paying customers. So you ensured that the voice that we're hearing of were legitimate, buyers of your products and services.
Yeah, absolutely. In the beginning, where I was leading a large company at Siemens Energy and Automation, we had close to 12,000 people. It would be easy for one of the functional leaders to say, yeah, I'm going to the sales office in Chicago, and I'm going to do a roundtable with the sales guys and ask them what's happening, how are their customers, well, what are we doing for you? I said, no, that doesn't qualify. That's not a real and paying customer. It's not the same as getting unvarnished. And then you asked about building that in. We also tried to make sure that every individual, and again, with 12,000 people, there's a lot of individuals, think about and connect their role to impact on customer. And inherently, if I make that statement in a large group or on a quarterly all-employee webcast, the hands come up, whether they're virtual or otherwise, if somebody says, you mean internal customers too, because I deliver to Department X. And I say, no, I really want you to think about your impact on the external customer.
Yeah, I'm having this conversation with a lot of leaders who regrettably confuse their output with outcomes. And I'm like, that's great. What you do and how you do it is great. How does that create enterprise value? How does that create a better experience, less friction, more agility in how we engage the customers in the market? So William has a great question. How did you manage the resistance to that kind of cultural shift? Because that's exactly what you're talking about, is getting people out of that minutia of all the things I've got to get done to really focus on prioritizing, as you said, really the strategic, really the prioritized set of pursuits that are going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, that also is a good question. I found that it's a lot easier to get people energized for that movement on outside in than it is the other way around. If I came into a new role and said, look, it's clear we need to focus on cost. Let's go cost. The opportunities are there. Let's hit our supply chain. Let's optimize our process. Some of the people are gonna say, yeah, I get it. I know how to do that. But more often than not, you're going to have to drag some of them kicking and screaming. When you talk about, here's what's happening in the market, how does your role impact that? How do we think about growth? And again, at the end of the day, it's about results. And I've been fortunate that we've been able to generate quite a bit of growth, and from that growth, operating leverage. That also produces opportunities for people. Growth is the best way to enhance careers for the greater organization.
Love that. So Larry's got a great question. How did the customers take this? What was the response from the customers when they start seeing your IT leader that they've never seen, or head of your HR, and they're like, wait, that's not who I interact with?
Well, to be honest with you, when I moved to my last company and went from the board, I was a member of the board and was asked to step in as CEO to lead specifically a transformation towards organic growth. As I reached out with some of our sales contacts and said, look, I want to get a sense of what our customers are feeling and seeing, a lot of the sales guys were the first ones to go, what? Excuse me? This is new. And so clearly it was going to be difficult for the head of HR or the head of, IT or whatever to also get engaged. But once they do, again, I think it becomes a lot easier. And customers might have a little bit of why does HR want to meet with us? But once they show up and they talk, they're usually the feedback has been fantastic. We really love that the senior leadership is getting out here and listening. And not only listening, but hopefully, changing, taking action, and making things happen on our behalf.
Yeah. So Bill's got a great comment. A lot of organizations, Dennis, do this voice of the customer. Let's be honest. It's a goofy survey, or it's static at best. What a brilliant way to get firsthand from that customer, their lens, their perspectives. Earlier, you said you brought it back and you shared it. You kind of compared notes. How did you, in fact, utilize that information to really improve the performance of the business? Really, and again, you've driven some incredible enterprise value. You've transformed organizations. How did those insights directly relate to you making those improvement changes in the organization?
Yeah, well, Bill makes a good point, because formal voice of the customer input, quantitative and the like, is also very valuable and a part of an overall program that I think can enhance the business. In the context of the specifics that we were talking about, me, my staff, and the senior leadership spending regular dialogue with customers, we also started every staff meeting with about 30 minutes of once around the table, what are you hearing from the market? What's changing in the market? What do we see from competition? Are there any moves or things that we should think about as trend line changes? And that's the part where you asked about culture. That's where you start to build this into the culture. Because I have to say that half an hour is the least, maybe, it's the softest part of the agenda, the hardest part to manage, because it doesn't have a formal report out. It isn't a metric report out like a good voice of the customer program would be. This is a little bit about, hey, we're having regular interactions. Let's continue to integrate those into our leadership approach, decision making, and ultimately also team selection.
So Eric has a follow-up question. Would love to hear your views on outside-in discipline as it relates to kind of really creating that compelling vision. How do you, or how do you integrate this outside-in approach to? Is it developing? Is it tightening the aperture? Is it modifying it? How does that play into kind of a new vision or compelling vision forward?
Yeah. That's a great question, and one of the challenges for all of us in senior leadership. I think that I feel strongly that the senior executives are also the ones responsible for building brand. And that would build into a question of what is brand? And you have a brand promise. It's something hopefully you can be very precise and intentional. And when you put it out there, a part of the question is, what comes back? What comes back from the market? And so as you're building strategy and building then brand, one has to think about how does that reflect and come back. And of course, a piece of that is having a compelling vision for the future that your brand is actually serving. That's what I think gets people motivated. That's what you're going to want. Even that why kind of factor that Simon Sinek talks about in terms of motivating people and really having a sense of purpose. Those are elements of that vision exercise. And using the outside in factors to make sure that it resonates not only for your staff or your employees, but also that it reflects back from your customer base.
So you and I have also met some customers that, Dennis, they're seldom happy, right? So beyond customer satisfaction, I think we're all trying to meet, if not exceed, their expectations. DevTud wants to know, what do you believe is the real recipe to delighting those customers, to really perhaps turning around a bad situation or taking a customer relationship that's okay to really exceeding kind of what they're after?
Yeah, well, those are different points, I think. If I have a customer where we have a soiled relationship from a bad experience, I have to get them to neutral before I can get them to customer delight. And I think it's important to understand where are you in that environment. If I have a customer who, is good or neutral, and I want to move them up there, that's where then the rest of our activities, our actions, our customer experience level, needs to really drive. And so some of that comes from, again, culturally, and making sure that every individual, top to bottom, no matter what function, is thinking about what's my role and how does it impact customer. But a lot of times that's then also putting the resources and programs in place to make change that impacts customers, drives growth. The growth doesn't by itself bring operating leverage and the financial success, but I started my career 10 years in GE during the Jack Welch era. Of course, you have to have great process with great cost and good cost structure as well. But at the end of the day, it's the growth that really opens doors and can generate the big kinds of returns that we've been able to achieve.
And it gets everybody excited. I've never seen an organization cut its way to growth, right? So yeah. Growth really gets everybody excited around the future vision, future direction. Dennis, is outside-in leadership predominantly relevant to these large enterprise, Siemens, when I met you, 12,000 people, $4 billion in revenue, or is it as relevant to, say, a startup or a medium-sized company?
No, I think it's relevant in all cases. It can be relevant in all cases. I'll take it in a medium-sized, large company. We were developing a new lighting fixture for the market. And so rather than, continue to brainstorm internally, we sent our engineers out to go travel with installers and go travel in the market. And this was for a new streetlight. Streetlight hadn't really been innovated in quite a number of years. And what they found was you needed literally a bulletproof fixture, because in a lot of places, like street lighting is out there for safety, and the guys that don't want safety actually have a gun and they shoot bullets to put them out so they can conduct their business. Or you need a way to quickly, replace an aged, disposed, or damaged lighting fixture. And they watched the crews and how things worked and how they did their job. And they came back with a amazingly unique concept to build essentially a small docking station so that you could, with a half-turn twist, put the lighting fixture back up on the pole at in less time than it took to screw in a light bulb, as they say. And so that was an outside-in oriented, innovation development that we were a part of. Small companies, the same. Sometimes, the quote, disruptive ideas are a little hard for customers to really understand. And so, but still, innovation and customer are linked hand in hand.
You brought up several risks to leaders, leadership teams that don't embrace or are not proactive in embracing outside in? Talk about some of the risks of not doing this.
Well, the risks are really in the medium term. If you're getting cost out, you're showing good results, you're thinking, I got this, you're probably getting pat on the back. You might even be optimizing your short-term incentive targets. But the risk is you're doing that in the wrong way or for the wrong reasons. And so how do you know if you're not regularly sensing and have a good process for trying to understand what's happening in the world around us? What are lead customers thinking? And I mentioned lead customers. Most industries have customers that are more than willing to experiment and get out on the trials. Competitors, disruption is a hot topic, but the reality is it's people coming up with a substitute. And so if you're not paying attention to what other kinds of services or products, can be used as a substitute, again, you can get caught flat-footed. And then technology. All of those are the bigger factors. And I think if you just focus on what you can get done on your internal, it feels easier. You maybe can convince yourself that you're getting the results you need. You might even be getting paid well for that in the short run. But to generate that long-term healthy business, I think it's really important to have a rigorous outside-in orientation.
So we talked about the risk. We talked about the downside. Sander has a great question. Making this a priority for leaders. You talked about MBOs. Were there some reward structures that you used to really see an accelerated adoption and embracing that this makes sense? Let's prioritize it. Let's get out there as a team to really engage customers.
Well, I don't know. The reward structure comes in the end with the overall results, and I'll come back to that. One of the things you didn't ask, but I find that people needed, it's one thing to go out to a customer and ask for pain points, and certainly you can get an earful of those. As you said, you'll find unsatisfied customers or unsatisfied needs within satisfied customers. But the other is also to say, what kinds of things are on your agenda? What are you thinking about in the future? What are the opportunities you're trying to open up, and those kind of things? And be prepared to help somebody as they unlock their own innovation or perhaps their own growth. And so those are other ways that to prepare executives in particular who are having the top-to-top kind of discussions. From there, hopefully it's the aggregate business results. Well, while I was at Siemens Energy and Automation, we added 500 million in organic growth over a 2-year period. Again, gaining share in the market and doing so with price or with margin, depending on whether we're talking our long cycle business or a short cycle. That kind of results, that kind of momentum, is easy to use to continue to feed the machine and build the culture that you're looking for.
So you brought up, and you've done this, where you've built your own leadership development programs. You've built really raising the bar on the next generation of the leaders of the organizations you've led. And you actually tied it, you connected it right back into this outside-in leadership. Talk about that a second. How did you ascertain the quality caliber of your leaders? How did you elevate their perspective with the same lens?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to be early career in GE that had a real focus on talent and also had a host of different development programs that were very rich and very, embraced in history of the company. And so in my last 2 large roles, I came into a company that they had a little bit of lip service to high potentials, but they weren't really rated, and there was no program to really develop them. It wasn't really even a definition of what a high potential was. And in order to accelerate and build the business and forward the way we wanted to, it was clear we were going to need to invest in a group of high potentials which I'll define for you in those two instances, as people who not only can do their role well, but influence a great deal of others around them. And so that was a little bit of, at the beginning of a training and development, I would define that. It's not you're going to be promoted tomorrow. You have great influence over more than just your job. And in two of those cases, we had to stand up a leadership development program. I can talk to you a little bit about how we customize that in a way to help the business specifically.
Yeah, that'd be great. Can you just give us an example or two?
Yeah, well, in the last case, a lot of our business, first off, trying to embed the customer orientation. What I inherited was a company that was run as close to 20 different, separate units. And when I say separate, I mean I would meet people all over the company, and they'd hand me a business card, and it had a different brand. Hi, I'm Joe from Emtrol Buell. Hi, I'm Jane from Kirk and Bloom. Hi, I'm Sally from Peerless, and literally with different business cards. And so a little bit of this was bringing collective people together to share ideas. And we did so, one, with modules around customer. Then there were some financial elements that was sponsored by the CFO. So he defined kind of the curriculum, if I might, around that. And then we were an asset light company. So project management was more important as a key skill to build top to bottom, front to back, than, let's say, manufacturing skills and the like, since we used a lot of outsourced partners all over the world. And so that was a bit of the core of our curriculum. And there were some general management things, understanding yourself, leading people, things that permeate other companies. But we built this in a way to produce the kind of leaders that we want with the kind of skills that fit our company, not just in general.
You and I both have teenagers. I'm not complaining around you, but I'm losing hair at an accelerated pace. This question from Elizabeth just hits home. How do you convert people, or do you believe you can convert people who don't think they need to grow? If they're in that still, in many ways, Dennis, spring of their career, and for whatever reason, they're closed off to that opportunity to elevate their thinking, elevate their skills, knowledge, behaviors. Can you convert them? Can you help them think about their personal reinvention, if not evolution?
Yeah, well, first off, my kids are past that phase. So 22 and 23 right now, two 23s and a 22. So, they took all the hair with them. But I do, deep down, I want to believe that everybody has the capability to learn and continue to develop and even, make some of the shifts if you provide the right environment. Having said that, if I just use, for example, my last role, my predecessor was there for 6 years, did a fantastic job on the cost side, the cost-cutting side. Was a little acerbic in his style and approach, and that started to permeate the culture as well. And as we shifted to thinking about outside in, as we shifted to thinking about not just acquiring businesses, but organic growth, a few people couldn't make the shift. There was one example where one of my guys came to me and said, "It looks like I'm going to fall short on my orders targets this quarter. Do I need to start cutting again?" And again was, pretty much the appropriate word. And I said, "Well, that depends." He said, "Depends on what?" I said, "Well, what's happening in the market? If we're losing share, then just cutting again is not going to solve any of our real issues. But if the market is actually trending away from us and there's some reason a downturn in the market, then absolutely we need to cut ahead of those downturns." And that again is a little bit about, are we making decisions from outside in or just inside out? In a few cases, people couldn't really make that shift. They had gotten too ingrained in the kind of inside out cost as the only lever approach. And so we had to move on.
One of the things you and I have talked about is every time I read a book, I learn as much about my own content after the book comes out, because people read it and they think about it and they talk about it and they bring their own perspectives. Eric has an interesting question. In your own journey, have there been some experiences that shifted your beliefs or passion around this discipline? Dennis, either refuting some of your early perceptions or reinforcing it?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I was at GE and I was in my, still we would call it early career, but having a good career, moved around geographically 6 times, which meant 6 promotions essentially. And I thought about, if I ever get that corner office, I don't think I'm going to want to sit in it. And I say that this was GE at a time when GE was on its way to becoming the most valuable company in the world, And so as people took on the top jobs, I think there were 10, top operating jobs, there could easily be a tendency to be all and powerful and summon people to you. Even customers would come to you at GE. And I'm not saying that the whole group was like that, but I thought about that early on and evaluated and said, I don't think I want to just be in this office, even if I were to occupy this office. And so as time went on, and I did have a chance to lead some significant businesses, I just continue to remind myself, push to get out there on the road, be in the airport, do the travel that's required to be both out with your people and with your customers. And in most cases, in those larger organizations, it was a fairly easy routine. All my internal meetings, in Chicago and Houston and Los Angeles also included a stop, at least one, with, as I said, a real and paying customer.
So you brought up the corner office. Let's talk about that a second, because you also have as long as I've known you, you have a strong passion for the key role of that corner office. You talk about brand and culture. Talk about each of those from your lens, and why do you believe so strongly that those two are critical?
Yeah, well, both topics, you could talk about a brand, and if it doesn't already exist in your mind, it's some nebulous blob, and you could talk about culture and everybody has a different thought. And so the element of brand and really building a healthy, long-term, sustainable company is all about having a brand that has meaning in the market, that's reinforced every day with your innovation, that's reinforced every day with your people, that's reinforced every day on behalf of your customers. And to deliver that, you need to have the right kind of people who are motivated, who want to deliver that. Now, both of these topics require intense intentionality. You have to spend the time to think about, what do we want our brand to mean and say? You have to get out in the market and figure out, well, I can put it out this way, but if it comes back a different way, then I haven't done my job yet. And similarly with culture, if you're not very intentional over the kinds of behaviors, the norms we want in the organization, it can easily get masked by just whatever kind of stuff happens.
Do you believe the same focus on the organization's brand and the culture is as relevant to individual executives?
Well, that's a good question, because people talk about their personal brand and the like, and I guess if I was on my 11th book about to be released, I'd want to make sure that there's a nice thread, because people have an expectation of David Nour and his topic and your depth in relationship management, relationship economics, and all the way through to curb benders. I've never spent as much time thinking about, well, what is my personal brand? But I would probably say, you can tell I've lived it. I've lived the outside in multiple organizations. I've found that it's relevant. I've found that it turns people more on than off. in the context of leaning outside, making key decisions, tying things together. And honestly, I'm old enough to have been through 3 major downturns, economic shocks, if you like, the dot-com bust and 9/11, the financial crisis, and most recently COVID. And if you're working outside in and you're continuing to communicate, here's what's happening in the world around us, and these are therefore the actions we're taking to adapt, you find people are with you. I've found, especially in the financial crisis, people understood that the decisions we were taking were related to still what we're seeing in the market and how we want to grow. We had to change our definition of growth from quarter over quarter revenue increases to market share growth, but we did not turn our back on the growth agenda that we were after, even in that difficult period.
You brought up COVID. Switch gears with me and talk about trends you see. I know you're also very astute in both energy space as well as industrial automation. Dennis, talk about some of the trends you're seeing through the past year in this pandemic that you believe is going to, materially impact those 2 sectors, energy and industrial automation.
Yeah, well, I don't know if all of them are driven by COVID. COVID has accelerated a variety of technology shifts, probably, about 10 years in a way that they won't return. I think I heard that e-commerce was adding about 1% a year for the last 10 years, and maybe we were up to 8 or 10%, and boom, in 1 year we had 10% and still going. That's not going the other direction. And there's a variety of those kind of technical shifts and that have happened as a result of COVID. Think, medicine. I had already experimented at least once by doing an online doctor's appointment, but now commonplace and becoming more and more so. Those kind of things aren't my industry per se, but they're shifts that are all but permanent and going to continue to accelerate. In the industries that you ask me that I'm more familiar with, energy and automation has been moving as well, more lower cost and better sensors. And so it's all about managing that data for the benefit of productivity. Productivity could be in the way of quality, cost, output, speed. And on the energy front, we are so at the beginning of a significant energy transformation to lower cost carbon, both production, uses, et cetera, that there are going to be a lot of opportunities and a little bit of dislocation as well.
You also work with a lot of VC and private equity firms. There seems to be this plethora of capital on the sidelines looking for good deals. And we haven't even talked about SPACs for a second. What's happening in the capital space? What are you bullish about? What are you seeing VC and private equity firms get excited about?
Yeah, well, similarly, you put it out there. There's a pile of money. There have been a lot of good returns, and it's waiting to jump and attack good opportunities that are out there in the market. What I've seen is that means it's very difficult to find a unique deal at some kind of low valuation. The valuations have been pumped up some, and so you're not going to get a free lunch on the buying side very often. However, armed with a good executive and a unique perspective, there's still opportunities out there to find nice businesses in a number of these fields that we talked about that have an acceleration with a bit of reorientation that can move a lot faster towards growth, capturing market share, capturing new opportunities. A lot of the big leverage comes from taking, an old line industrial product business and figuring out how to turn that into a recurring revenue stream, whether that's with software, with services, with aftermarket, and the like. All of those tend to really increase the overall value, stickiness of the customer and the returns on a business.
You and I, switching gears to a more personal lens, you and I talked about you're an avid soccer player. You've been playing. What did you say? You've kicked the soccer ball on our podcast interview. You've kicked the soccer ball around the earth. How many times?
Well, I did a little bit of math. I played for 40 years. I'm officially retired. Call it again, but and I did the math on how many days, how many miles, how many different things, and yeah, I think I've actually could have gone once around the globe.
I love it. Talk about the influence soccer has had on you as a leader. What do you do on a soccer pitch? What have you done over the years in a competitive environment that you believe directly translates to the way you think about leadership, the way you develop the next generation of leaderships? Compare and contrast those two for a second.
Yeah, well, I would have to say that it has a market influence on how I think about business and leadership. Soccer is a game where, you have 11 players on the field and they have, 10 of them have, related skills. The goalkeeper, usually a little bit of unique skills. But once the game starts, the clock runs. There are no timeouts, there are no adjustments, there are only a couple of substitutes allowed anyway. And so the team has to be prepared and has to function together. And so for my money, it's really the most team-oriented team sport out there. And the example that supports it is you don't take the best player in the world and plop them into any team, and all of a sudden that's the best team. I mean, arguably Messi's the best player in the world, and they've yet to win a World Cup with Argentina. So there's an example that supports that. However, when the team is working, everybody has a role, they have their specialization, but they're working for each other. And if you look at any of the best soccer teams and the like, it's how they're working for each other when they don't have the ball, how they're confident they can attack together, even though they might be leaving a space open in the back, how they're defending together, the movements, the synchronization, those kind of things. And then when it comes to leadership development, any sports franchise, you have to be upgrading and top grading every year and continuing to think about how do we get better. And so that too plays a role in how I think about building a strong team and a strong business.
Great lens, great perspectives, great context. Do you believe identifying, onboarding, developing talent has gotten more challenging through this pandemic, or actually easier because you no longer have those geographic constraints?
I still have to say more challenging, but everybody has a little bit different point in time. Before the pandemic in the U.S., we were at full employment. It was very difficult to get people. And if you needed them to move or things like that you said, even more difficult. And so you had to have a compelling value proposition and a good opportunity to get the best talent. And you'd better have been doing your internal homework to keep people motivated and developing as well to keep good talent. For a lot of industries, most that I worked in, the pandemic caused a significant downturn, and so it was a little bit of reverse. And so now we're at a very high unemployment level. There's a lot of great talent on the sidelines, but trying to bring them in and integrate and build culture, I think is a little more challenging with everybody still mostly remote. And so, can be done, is being done. But the more change you need, the more, those soft interactions can be valuable as well.
Staying on the talent agenda for a second, I was talking to a home builder client, Dennis, who are struggling with labor, right? Skilled labor. They can't find enough welders and concrete and sheetrock layers, and they're the graying of the industry, right? So the seasoned talent that is retiring, there's not as much of apprenticeship, there's not as much of that young talent coming in. What did you do in that arena? And again, particularly in the industrial and automation space and energy, that seems to be very much about skilled labor. What do you think is the answer? How do we backfill some of those skill talent?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that a reinvestment in trade schools and making that a viable approach would really help, because most of the trades are in that boat where there's not enough people to support kind of the forecast of what we would think around construction, whether it's residential, commercial, other kinds. And at the same time, a lot of suppliers into those industries are finding ways to do things that make the installation part of that, much more simple and less labor intensive, where you might be doing some kind of pre-wiring of electrical products so that by the time they show up to site, there's just a few connections rather than many, and making products that are quick connect versus require specialized tooling and specialized capability. There's a lot of things happening on both of those ends. But if there's a big surge like it appears we are going to have in residential, we're short people in this country and have been for a while.
Hunter's got and I would encourage our audience to jump in. You've been asking some great questions that I encourage you to continue. So Hunter wants to know, I'll let you go first and I'll build on that. How can younger employees learn from this pandemic? And Dennis, be prepared for another crisis later on in their professional lives, right? He talks about improving digitally, nonlinear growth, so on and so forth. Give those in the spring of their careers some lessons, some things to think about from this pandemic.
Yeah, well, it's been particularly hard on the just out of college crowd, because in a lot of big cities and a lot of big companies, people are used to working hard out of school and doing a lot of things and burning the midnight oil, as they say. But then they were also used to then collegially, going down to the corner bar in New York and continuing to press on socially. And a lot of that has been put back. So it's pretty difficult. And one of the things that is important is how to lean in and be visible. I'm not the most extroverted person in the world. And so, it's something I have to think about, to lean in, be visible, whether that's one-on-one. I have to coach my sons in that as well. Hey, I'm getting good at this remote work. I'm doing great work. They like it. You need to be visible as well to make sure it gets recognized. That's what you would be if you were in and around a common office. So it's just a couple of things.
Yeah, just so Hunter, very quickly to build on those, I want you to think about three things. One is, again, it's very difficult for most of us, and thankfully we haven't been through a global war like maybe our generations before us did, but it profoundly changed them, and it had a ripple effect on how they saved and how they thought about spending, and their prudent look at risk. I think this pandemic, for certainly the next generation, is a wake-up call in some ways of that more of that save and give versus spend. So one is that financial stewardship, and not just financial, but stewardship of your resources. That's one. Two is I'm going to talk about something I'm passionate about, which is your relationships, right? If you didn't have the relationships pre-pandemic, it's very difficult to interact and engage and influence and connect. And conversely, one of the first things I did is I made a list of my top 100 relationships, a year ago, and I started to reach out to them, and I learned from them. And they also became great opportunities when there wasn't any travel and I wasn't getting on planes and getting on stages. The last one is really sharpen the aperture, sharpen your lens on anticipating. Now, none of us could have anticipated this global pandemic and the greater economic and lives and livelihoods that it would create, but you've got to sharpen your lens to see faint signals. And more importantly, move with enormous amount of speed and agility. So as you see things happening, you can continue to watch them, or you can ask what happened, or you can kind of lead your response to them. So those might be three good things to think about. Dennis, let's talk about curve benders. Obviously, the title of our podcast interview this morning. And for our audience, I would encourage you to check out nourgroup.com/podcast. Dennis and I had a fabulous conversation this morning on this outside in leadership and some great content, whatever you consume podcasts. We talked about curve benders, Dennis, as relationships in our lives that have a profound impact on shaping not just our short-term performance, execution, and results, but really shaping us as managers and leaders. Talk about one or two people that have had that impact on you in your journey.
Yeah, in the podcast, I mentioned a couple of people that always come to mind. One of them was a guy after 6 moves. I left GE, I went to Thomas & Betts, and I got under a guy named Tom Edmonds, who was just off the charts EQ. And it wasn't just the business coaching, support, and impact he had. He saw some of the decisions I was making with family and personal a little bit, and could see that they were a little short-term oriented. I'd moved 6 times in 10 years, so it's kind of in my head already, when do I move again? And he pointed out some ways to, not live in that mental gypsy kind of a mode. Now, I have moved several times since, but I managed to ways to plant roots in each of the locations I was in, and really live, call it stable with family in each and every location there. So that was pretty meaningful. We're still great friends and everything, and so I've really appreciated that. Others, I would say on the reverse side, I've been lucky to work around a lot of talented people, and have been able to help a number of people who I saw really had spark and really had the capability and really had the depth, and help them and say, I could be working for them. And you know me well enough. I don't ever really think, I have to work for them or work for you, but really they could. And several people come to mind that have advanced their careers, again, even further than I have, and just fantastic success.
You did something very unusual in our podcast, which in 50 plus episodes, no one else had done, which was you asked me a question. So before we wrap this up, I'm actually going to open it up. Any questions of me that I can answer for you?
Well, you're on book 11. I got it right this time. And so, when you first started that first book, what was the compelling driver that got you over the hump to get it actually published?
Yeah, I have to tell you, it was OutsideIn leadership. I would get out and speak to conferences. I would do leadership programs. I would engage audiences, and I would share with them some of those Nourisms you've heard over the years, right? So here, this is relationship currency. This is reputation capital. This is really important in your professional net worth. And at some point, people would say, is there a book? Is there a, is there a cliff notes on this? How do we get more of this? And enough people asked that, and I had, it is a time consuming endeavor. And I jokingly tell my male friends, and this is a terrible analogy, but it's the closest thing we'll come to giving birth, because it does take time and effort, and it's just painful at times. And right, you just got to be committed to it. So I put it up for a long time. Then I finally published, I still have a copy, a booklet. And I got asked enough times, is there a book, that I finally, got educated on what would be involved and what's the task, and do I want to self-publish versus go commercial? And finally in 2008, so I started this practice in 2002, 2008, I published the first book, Relationship Economics. And I got to tell you, it never gets easy, but it certainly gets easier as you get a process down and you start to replicate a set of know-hows that worked for you in the past. So, but thank you for asking that. For our audience, if you joined us late, you've been listening to Dennis Sadlowski, longtime CEO, board member. I say this in front of him. I say this when he's not around. One of the most intelligent executives I know. He forces me to think like Eric McCarthy and others that I'm blessed to know. And Dennis, I want to thank you for being our guest on Curve Benders Live today.
Thank you, David. It's always a pleasure.
Great.
I hope that the audience takes at least one nugget with them and that they can use in their future as well.
I'm sure they will. Thanks again.
Thanks, David.